If you visited a farm field in Minnesota before World War II, you likely would have come across a crop that is not very common today, hemp. When the U.S. government passed the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, hemp's dominance took a significant downturn. Aimed at the commercial sales of cannabis products, the act also imposed an excessive tax on hemp sales, which was a hindrance to many farmers. During World War II, hemp made a comeback when imports of hemp that were needed to produce parachutes, marine rope, and other military necessities became scarce. The federal government even launched a pro-hemp campaign, which included the distribution of 400,000 pounds of seed. It also released the Hemp for Victory film to encourage farmers to grow as much hemp as possible for the war effort.
So hemp was grown pretty widely in the state of Minnesota, especially around World War II, surrounding the kind of war effort. The federal government was really encouraging farmers to grow hemp, and we had a lot of processing capability to make things like canvas and rope and things that were needed for the war. After that, the need for the product kind of went down, but then also we were having conversations about drugs in America, and that led to the passage of the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, in which hemp was really linked with marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic, so it could not be grown anymore in an agronomic setting.
Nearly 50 years later, hemp is once again starting to take root in the U.S. With the passing of the 2014 Farm Bill, states like Minnesota are able to implement laws that allow its Department of Agriculture and universities to grow hemp for research or pilot programs. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, states are allowed to set up a plan to regulate hemp to ensure that any crop grown doesn't exceed federal standards for THC.
So after the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill, the Minnesota legislature passed the Industrial Hemp Development Act in 2015, and that really gave the Department of Agriculture authority to run a pilot program under the Farm Bill. And so the department had hemp growers growing, and that first year we had 6 growers growing 40 acres, which was really an achievement since we hadn't had hemp growing since the 1950s in Minnesota. But there were a lot of challenges getting the program up and running. We had to get a DEA permit to even move hemp material into the state, and so it was very much a learning experience that first year. So out of the applications that we have right now, we have about 12,000 acres, and about half of those acres are registered to be growing for CBD. About the other half is registered to be growing for grain, and we only have about 120 acres growing for fiber. And so because that market isn't there, we think that's the reason why a lot of people aren't growing for fiber. If you're growing hemp in Minnesota, you have to be registered with the state, and so that is for the pilot program, but also farmers licensed to grow hemp. So in order to be licensed through the Department of Ag, you have to go through a background check, you have to get your fingerprints taken, you have to pay any sort of fees that we request for the program, and then you have to identify all of the locations that you plan to grow hemp on. And that's because at the end of the growing season, 30 days before harvest, MDA comes out and tests that hemp to make sure that it's not over the 0.3% threshold of THC levels. And so those locations are really critical to us. The farmers also are required to sign a memorandum of understanding with the state that outlines what the requirements are for the pilot program.
While Leigh and Shanna Berry's vision for raising hemp on their traditionally corn and soybean farm began about 3 years ago, 2019 will mark their first growing season.
I guess the reason why we got in this year, it had been a thought for long enough, and we finally had to act on it and get our act together and get moving and just try it and make our mistakes and hopefully some successes along the way.
Leigh had told me a couple years ago that they were interested in growing something indoor at the ranch if possible, just not 100% sure what. And then about a year ago, it turned into an interest into the hemp and the CBD end use. And so I started just in general researching, and just what they needed from me was to learn how to grow it and specifically the nutrition.
This field went in June the 15th. We were a couple weeks later than our target date. We had to do some transplanting in places, and then we have been planting off and on for basically a month. Yep, so we'll find out if the later plants do what they'll do and the earlier plants, but ideally we'd like to be in closer to the June 1st. You hand plant them with a water wheel planter. It rolls across the top of the plastic, pokes a hole, and we drop the plant in, and then come back and hand pack the plants in. We're covering about 6 acres total. We designated areas according to soil type, just to see which soils were better, pest pressure, aphids, just how if it works good with a close to another crop, and just kind of spread it out and see what's working and if there's better areas that we need to concentrate on.
Just like in corn and beans, there's a million ways that a grower can grow a corn crop. So 28 growers that I work with, not one of them does the same as another one. And so it's the same in the hemp industry, is that some growers are going to grow solid seed, males, females. They're going to harvest the seed, bale the straw. Leigh and Shanna decided to go this route, and that was the way that they had chose, was to go this route, more like how tobacco is grown. And so the spacing, after some research Leigh had done, was the spacing and then the equipment that went along with it. And then from there on, and feminized seed. And from there on, knowing that end use of how they wanted to have that end oil content, that's kind of, everything just kind of is a domino effect from one choice to the next to the next.
Yeah, we try to get it like a garden, and when we form our bed, everything just works so much better. You're not dealing with any sod and the moisture. It just doesn't flow through the machine like it should. So we had to make some modifications and stumble through it, because we had a window to get our beds made so we could get in with the plants. But if it's not right, the plants don't go in good. The drip tape doesn't want to lay where it should. You get critters living underneath the plastic where you got voids. So yeah, it's got to be good. It's just got to be a good garden type tillage.
The watering, we're still figuring that out. Again, it's a very trial and error basis, and each site is different. We found that like Leigh and Shanna have been very intensively managing all the sites on the watering end of it. We're finding that we know that the plants don't like wet feet, but they definitely like water. And the sites that are set up this year are very well-drained sites, which work really well. There's one that's probably a little bit heavier, that tends to hold water a little bit longer, but it's just kind of managing the plant's response. And that's one of the things, learning about this and connecting with people that are much more seasoned than I am in this, that consult on the West Coast. And that was one of the things I struggled with, is there was no quantitative values of anything going into this, watering, nutrition. And a lot of them just said, well, you kind of just get the feel of the plant. You'll do something to it and you'll see how it responds. And that's virtually what we've learned how it really is. It's not like a normal bean and corn crop. You make the watering applications, the nutrition applications, and you see how it responds, and then you kind of dial it in from there on how much more or less you need to do. So our logging and keeping track of everything that we're doing, we do a few different ways just to have a couple checks and balances that something doesn't get missed. But anything that's started as seed starts, everything gets labeled. Everything that I've cloned gets labeled. And then in our grow realm, we have a calendar of what gets done each day, just in general. And then we have a shared file, note file, that gets shared back and forth between Leigh's and my phone, that it's what they're doing for applications, what I'm doing for cloning or planting or applications or seeing in the field. Those types of things all get documented in that note file. And then I also have a shared photo album that gets shared also. So any of my scouting that I do in general on the farm, plus with these sites, I have a shared album for each site. So all the protocols that have been written for nutrition, anytime that I'm scouting, there's a picture of a bug or a date or a note. Everything is on those shared files. So he always has access to each site how much gets put down on certain runs, and the calculations are already done. In about a week, there'll be a protocol started where there'll be another party coming in to take tissue tests, and they will run it through their lab. And then that will give us a weekly guideline to go by on the THC, and then also visual. Once we get into the flowering stages and the resin is visible, then we can start seeing whether it's virtually the color of the resin, of when we need to start pulling the pin of when it's going to start turning too hot for us to harvest. And we want to for sure be on the early side of that.
If you do go over that threshold, the state does offer a retest. You pay to get your material retested. If it comes back the same as the first test, then you destroy your crop. We ordered a harvester this spring, then found out that it'll just miss our harvest window. It won't be here till like December. Harvest the flower here in the field. We'll send everything through a bucker to strip all the leaves off, the majority of the leaves and stems, so you leave them behind. And then the bud will be transported down to the ranch, and we will put it out and dry it out on racks. Bring the moisture down, and then once it's at the proper level for storage, then we can go ahead and bag it and store it and be ready for the extraction process. THC numbers were really low this year. I think 0.17 was our highest THC content, so it was very, very low. We would have had warmer weather. I would have anticipated those numbers being a little bit higher, but well under the threshold. It just varied so much from plant to plant, and when your yield at the end was, did you have enough water? Did you have enough heat? Did you have this? Did you have that? Talking to all the different growers, we were all kind of in a very similar weather pattern. That really made the difference. It's just that yield at the end of the day. Input costs some varied because of where you bought your starts, or if you started them yourselves, or if if you're on organic ground and you didn't have to put a bunch of fertilizer in. And labor. Did you have enough labor to do your own harvest? Did you have to hire labor to do your harvest? The harvest kind of falls on top of all the other harvests out there. So that part kind of gets tricky as far as being able to staff appropriately.
For 2020 season, we're going to have one large site. It will be a site that we used last year, but double the size. And the site has been amended and prep work already done. And then we'll possibly have another smaller site, is my plan, just to have a small research site so that can control all the variables on a smaller scale and continue the feeding and tissue test regimen, and hopefully continue to learn on multiple strains within a site, as well as our large site. It's just that we'll be more efficient with our time and travels.
Although there is still much uncertainty in the hemp industry, the strong market growth for hemp-derived products like CBD make betting on hemp's future stability an attractive option for many farmers.
The buyer market has changed a little bit. Last year you were able to sell it in the crude form. There was a lot of demand for it, a lot of people getting into the industry. This year it seems like it has to be of the highest quality in order to move it on. You don't have mediocre oil and expect to move it. So that process has kind of changed. There's been some back-end refinement that needs to be done to improve the numbers.
As we wait for guidance from the federal government, from the USDA on the Farm Bill, we're going to be able to have our program up and running by the next growing season. So on the grower side of things, I think we'll have our regulations figured out. On kind of the food side of things and the marketing side of things, those challenges will take a little bit more time. I know FDA has started considering changing the rules that they have for food and drugs with CBD, but those are long public processes that take a lot of input and a lot of data that, again, we don't have because we haven't been researching this crop for a long time. So I think the Department of Ag will have our ducks in a row in terms of the hemp program, but there are all these other considerations that need to be made to make the industry really a success in Minnesota.
What excites me about growing hemp is the industry's young. It's a big enthusiastic group. There's a lot of things that haven't been done. It's a new crop to the area, and it's a challenge, I guess. Just be prepared. Whatever you can get done today, do it today. Get your license, get your background check done, start working towards that. The more you can put behind you, the easier it is. Working the ground, getting things right makes it go a whole lot easier.
Start small. It can be overwhelming. Don't be afraid to reach out to people, but don't be afraid to do it your own way either, because there really is no right or wrong way. We don't know that there's a right or wrong way, and we still don't know, but as far as learning for the year, you know more, like we say, we know more today than we did yesterday. And there's a lot less things that I can tell you that I didn't learn than I did learn in the last 7 months.
Hi, I'm Dave Mowitz. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit subscribe right here if you haven't already, and click that little bell right here to be notified when we post a new video. And click here to see more great videos.